Hey, Annie umfray ountain me escray. No, just kidding. Sorry, we're not speaking Pig Latin today, but we are gonna have a lot of fun with words and with plants, and it's gonna help demystify some of the trickier succulent names out there. Because as you start getting into succulents, you can run into a lot of unfamiliar Latin, and it can be a little bit daunting, but I promise, with only a little bit of background info, the world of Latin naming is going to tell you so much about your succulents. And as you understand what they mean, those names become a lot easier to recall. So soon you're going to be spouting off names like Ostro, Cylindro, Puntia, Subulata with the best of them. So, ear hey you a-okay. If I could, I would start every video with the same disclaimer, and that's just that I may not pronounce Latin names the exact same way that you do. And it's funny because when it comes to botanical Latin, one of the few things that people can agree on is that there's not always one correct way to say things, and people just pronounce things in different ways depending on their language and their accent. And part of that is that botanical Latin's been evolving for a long time from classical Latin, and along the way it's picked up all these influences around the world. But there are a couple basic tips that I can share with you to just lead you in the right direction. And when in doubt, my policy's always been say 'em loud and say 'em proud. To start, with botanical Latin, you can really break down some very long, imposing names and just work it out letter by letter, pronouncing each one. So this little guy, for example, I would break it down and say corpuscularia. And you can put it all together and you get corpuscularia. There's a couple exceptions to that, and I'll go over them. One is if you have an AE or an OE right at the beginning of the word or in the middle of it, like this guy here. I'm gonna go ahead and put the AE together to make an A sound for aeonium. But if that were at the end, like for this plant here, then I am gonna pronounce the O and the E separately, so kalanchoe. And there's some other words out there that we've anglicized, and we might say something like aloe and just pronounce the O and the E together. But in other languages like French and Spanish, you would say this, aloe. And speaking of kalanchoe, that is just one of these words that is notorious for having a lot of different pronunciations depending on which rules you follow. But here at Mountain Crest, we stick with kalanchoe. And you might notice, even though this word has a CH in it, I'm pronouncing it more like a K. And that's just because in classical Latin, CH makes a K sound instead of ch. And you can remember that with a word like echo, in that we say echo, not echo. And the same goes for our Echeveria, except that this one also has a bit of regional variation depending on who you ask. And some people will pronounce it Echeveria. But it sort of makes sense because the plant is named in reference to a real person, and his name would have been pronounced Echeveria. So, Echeveria, Echeveria, your call. Two more consonants that are worth talking about are C and G. And for the most part, they're gonna give us a nice hard K and G sound, as in our crassula and our gasteria. But there are some exceptions, like if they get followed by a vowel like E, I, Y, AE, or OE, then they're gonna get softened, and we end up with words like senecio or Delosperma nubigenum. But really, it's the same way we would pronounce them in English, so go with your gut and remember, loud and proud. As for vowels, they can be a little bit rife with exceptions, and part of that is just because, in the dynamic language that is botanical Latin, the way you pronounce vowels is often heavily influenced by your language and your dialect. So for example, this plant in the UK, you would more often hear called sempervivum, but in the US, a lot of people will tend to say sempervivum. And at Mountain Crest, we say sempervivum, and a cool way to remember this is that, viva is like the root of the word to live. So, viva sempervivum, the big name for a small plant. It's the Anacampsaros telephiostrum forma variegatum. This little guy really well illustrates where to put the emphasis in words in Latin. And it's basically always gonna go on the second to last syllable of every word. So you can hear that here with Anacampsaros telephiostrum variegatum. And the same is going to go for shorter words over here, like our sedum and the aloe. Even if they have 2 syllables, we're just going to put the emphasis on the first one. One exception that you're going to want to remember is the words that end in IO or IA, because they're actually going to get the emphasis on the third to last syllable. So you see that here with our senecio and the gasteria. For a quick reference, you can find all the names written out phonetically at the top of each category page. But for now, here's a number of other succulent names that people often stumble over. Sempervivum Hufelii. If Hugh Grant took a stumble, we would say, Hugh fell, EI. Cotyledon tomentosa, bear's paw. Tomentosa means fuzzy. String of pearls, Senecio rowleyanus. Named for the botanist Gordon Rowley. Sedum oaxacanum, from Oaxaca. Opuntia microdaisies, variety Albospina. Small and hairy with white spines. Orostachys malacophylla, soft leaves. Moonstones. Pachyphytum oviphyrum, thick egg-shaped leaves. Aeonium arboreum, eternal and tree-like. Succulents can cross or hybridize really easily, and that's just when 2 different plants mix pollen and create a mashup of the 2. And there's also a really easy naming convention for this. So when 2 different plants mix and combine, we just take part of each name and mix and combine those. So I'll give you a couple examples. Over here, if we start with a graptopetalum, cross it with an echeveria, we're gonna get a graptoveria. If we start with a manfreda, cross it with an agave, we get a mangave. And third, if we start with a sedum, cross it with an echeveria, we get a sedaveria. At this point, you might be asking yourself, why do we even bother with Latin? This is crazy when plants have a lot of easy common names. Like, can't we just call them a string of pearls or an ivory towers or a zebra plant? And there's a number of good reasons for this. First of all, every plant on Earth has just one unique scientific name, but they can have multiple common names, and this causes confusion. And the reverse is possible too, where a single common name can refer to multiple different plants. So for example, if you ask me for a mother of thousands succulent, I'm not really sure. Do you mean Kalanchoe delagoensis, Kalanchoe exutonii, or Kalanchoe crenodigramantiana? And it doesn't stop there, because scientific names really are great for allowing us to communicate all around the world about plants. It's sort of like a universal language, whereas common names come in all sorts of different languages. So this guy over here is a great example. Its Latin name, Portulacaria afra, but in English, its common name that we use is elephant bush. But the plant itself is actually native to South Africa, and there in Afrikaans, its common name would be spekboom. Are you still with me? Great, let's talk structure, because every scientific name has just 2 words to it. And they're a bit like a first and last name, but reversed. So if you take my name, for example, Annie Schreck, you take that second word, Schreck, and it describes a whole group, my family of ogres, so to speak. And when you add the first name in there, those 2 words together describe just me. And it's a lot like that with plants, but reversed. So instead, it's going to be the first word that describes a whole group of related plants, otherwise known as a genus. And when you add the second word in, you're describing just one plant, also known as a species. So if we take this little guy, for example, Senecio scaposus, that name lets me know that it's related to all the other Senecios on the table here. But when we add in the second word there, I know you're talking about just this one particular species. This system was introduced by the botanist Linnaeus in the mid-1700s, and it's stuck around ever since because it's clear, it's concise, and it works. This little plant, Sempervivum tectorum, is a really great example of how illustrative botanical Latin can be. It's got kind of 2 common names in English, houseleek and hens and chicks. And hens and chicks refers to its growth habit. It produces new offsets around its base, and they do kind of look like chicks surrounding a mother hen. But then in Latin, sempervivum means semper, always, and vivum, alive. And it got that genus name, always alive, just because it's so resilient and prolific at popping out those new generations of chicks that it almost seems like the plant never dies. And its other common name, houseleek, refers to this old medieval practice where people would plant them on rooftops to ward off lightning. And funnily enough, the second part of its Latin name, tectorum, means of the roof. Botanical names change all the time. And it's happening more and more these days as DNA analysis helps us understand how plant family trees are organized. And it can be really frustrating, I get it, because, A, change is hard, and B, we're back to the same duplicate name problem where some people are using the old names and some people are using the new ones. But for that reason, on our website, you'll find sometimes multiple listings of synonyms, and that's just because whether you call this Haworthia fasciata or Haworthiopsis fasciata, we know you're talking about a zebra plant. You can find all the succulents we've talked about today and a bunch more long, silly names over at mountaincrestgardens.com. And if you want to learn more about botanical names, I would highly recommend Lorraine Harrison's book, Latin for Gardeners. And until next time, happy succulenting.